Welcome everyone to this webinar, which is on maintenance of stormwater projects to tend and keep stormwater project maintenance for sustainability. And I want to introduce my colleague, Anna Owinbo, who will share how this program fits with our Green Team Leaders Training.
Yeah, so hi everyone, welcome. I just really want to underscore our excitement at your commitment to this work. We're really inspired by everyone and, how you keep plugging away with your teams. As you know, these learning labs are part of our Faithful Green Leaders training. And I'd like to encourage anyone who is on this call and may not have attended any of the core team building trainings that we've held so far. So far, we've had 4. But if you take a look at our website, you'll see that we have a number coming up. And if you haven't attended any of them yet, just, grab a couple of people from your congregation and join us. I'll go ahead and put a link in the chat to the registration page and take a look once we're done with this webinar. So welcome everyone. Over to you, Kolia.
Thanks, Anna. So without any further ado, our first speaker is Ted Wolf, who's the Operations Director of Howard EcoWorks. And I'm going to invite Ted to take it away with his presentation on maintaining and revitalizing rain and conservation gardens.
Great, thanks, Kolia. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for attending today. As Kolia mentioned, I'm the Operations Director at Howard EcoWorks. We are a local nonprofit based in Howard County. We work with all kinds of property owners, from small individual homeowners to HOAs to congregations, and anyone that wants to kind of work to become more environmentally friendly on their property. So I'm here to talk a little bit about revitalization and maintenance of rain gardens, which are kind of 2 separate tasks, but they also have a little bit of overlap between the 2. So oftentimes, a rain garden, unfortunately, can be neglected. I'm sure we've all seen some of these on roadsides and in different places. And so after a rain garden's neglected, like in this picture below, that's actually a larger rain garden called a bioretention. That rain garden hasn't been maintained at all. So you see basically just lots of weeds. And so once a rain garden gets to that stage, what we really need to do is an intensive maintenance event, which what we're calling a revitalization. And basically that's going to help bring that rain garden or bioretention or conservation landscape back up to a point where it can filter and treat stormwater. It can provide ecosystem services to the natural wildlife and inhabitants of that area. It can also improve the beauty and the aesthetic appeal, which also helps get people more interested in their rain garden or that practice in general. Next, thanks. So what does it mean to revitalize a rain garden? Basically ensuring that it's going to work as it was originally designed to. Over time, anything that we have, whether it's our car, our house, or a rain garden out in our property, it's going to need to be maintained. And if it doesn't get maintained, it's going to fall into a state where it needs to be revitalized. So in this case, what we want to do is we want to ensure that the garden performs well. In this case, it's capturing stormwater, providing an establishment, an area for plants to grow and thrive. But also it can be used as an educational tool. And so I'm going to go into detail about one of the gardens that we revitalized this past summer and fall at St. John's Episcopal in Ellicott City. That's actually what that little picture is right there. That is an original design for that rain garden back in 2014. Next. Great. So before you revitalize a garden, you do need to have kind of a sequence of steps that you want to go through. So the first step really is to determine what do you need to do. And that's really done with an assessment. You need to go to the garden itself. You need to kind of determine what tasks need to be done, what tools you need for those tasks, how many people you can work with safely in that area. And this is a new consideration for this year and going forward. A lot of rain gardens aren't, they vary in size. Some are much smaller than others and some are much larger. So just considering how many folks can safely work in a small area if you have a smaller practice is something that we've recently incorporated into our thought process when we do these revitalizations. And then another important part too is IDing the plants. This is a really, really important part about maintaining, revitalizing, and continuing to do so for all these practices. Plant ID can be really tricky if you're not like professionally trained in this or have gone to school for it. A lot of plants look really similar to the untrained eye. And so what we use is a number of different applications and resources, which have really become available recently, really on our phones, that help us ID a lot of these plants. One here that we use frequently is called iNaturalist. That's a really great app. You kind of crowdsource information from other enthusiasts, hobbyists, and professionals in academics in the industry. When you submit photos and people will respond with information. Just to list a couple other ones, because I know there's a plethora out there. PlantNet, like planet, but 2 words, PlantNet. That's another great one that comes highly recommended. LeafSnap, PlantSnap, and more recently I've realized that my smartphone has something called Google Lens. If anyone knows what that is, and that has proven to be one of the most successful plant ID apps. Surprisingly. So if you have a phone with Android on it, maybe check it out to see if you have Google Lens. Next. Great. So what we found through doing a lot of revitalizations this past year is there's a number of common tasks that seem to come up. And so I've listed here the number of the tasks that we tend to see at almost every garden we go to. There's almost always a presence of weeds that we need to remove, and there's almost always a excessive amount of organic material, and that being things like mulch, leaves, dead compost, or dead plants rather, from previous years of neglect and not being maintained. That needs to be removed if you have too much of it as well. Garden elevations is also another important part of this. We want to make sure these gardens are functioning, and so that does require kind of seeing how well they are in spec with their original designs. That's where having the original designs really comes in handy if you can find those. Depending on who put in your project or how old it is going to really determine if you can find the designs and how robust they are. But that's basically the guide that you want to use to kind of measure the different elevations in your garden, which is key to capturing stormwater. You need an optical level at that point, which is a fairly basic piece of equipment, but it is a specialized tool that you need to use to really measure those. And then you really want to consider, what is the garden going to look like after you do all that weeding, after you remove all that organic matter, after you've performed all those tasks? Are you going to have a lot of space where there's no plants? And that's where you really need to start thinking, do we need to repopulate the plant material in this garden to increase the biodiversity, but also the plant coverage, which is going to really save a lot of maintenance in the long run when you have a lot more plant coverage and just robust, healthy plants in there. Next. But the most important task, and I can't overstate this enough, is to continue maintaining this. Like I said, maintenance and revitalization, they kind of have some overlap, and revitalization is just a much more intensive maintenance task, usually due to neglect of maintenance over the years. So if you revitalize a garden, but then don't continue to maintain it with the green team or just a group of volunteers, then it's going to fall back into that state where you're going to have to come back and revitalize it in another year, another 2 years, depending on what kind of pressures you have in that garden. So I usually recommend at least once a month doing some sort of monitoring event or maintenance event, depending on the season of the year, and just walking around, checking the condition of your practice, your garden, and seeing if you need to perform a maintenance event then and there, or scheduling one with some volunteers. The more frequently, the better. Can't be overstated enough. Bi-weekly is the best way to do it. Then you could do an assessment and then come back and then do a maintenance event after you've realized what you need to do. So can't overstate that enough. So this is the example I kind of wanted to demonstrate. We've seen a number of conditions of gardens as we've done revitalizations. And I wanted to focus on one that was in a little bit more disrepair than the others, because it kind of incorporated a lot of the tasks that I just listed. So here's a design from 2014, back when my program was 2 years old. We were a very new program, and we actually didn't have a landscape designer. So you can see this was drawn pencil and colored pencils on a sketch piece of paper by one of my friends, Allison Santori, back in the day. So that's where I mentioned, depending on how old your garden is and who built it, will really depend on how robust your designs are. So in this one, you can see this garden really just looks like kind of spotty grass, really patchy grass. And if you're familiar with what Bermuda grass is, that's really what you're looking at. Inside of the entire garden, it's just Bermuda grass, and it looks like there's some areas of bare soil, but really it's just dried and dyed back Bermuda grass. Along the back side, you'll see a lot of shrubs, which were originally planted in the garden and actually survived really, really well. And they've made a nice border between the pine trees and the cedars behind those. So that's kind of the defining edge of the garden. And just for perspective, so we're all on the same page, the left picture is facing downhill. So you'll have a series of pools where water will flow from one into the other once they overfill, all the way to the end of the practice, which is furthest in the left picture, into a storm drain. Next. And so on the left picture again, this is from the opposite perspective. So now we're looking uphill into the garden. And that red circle indicates what we identified as the structural failure. There was a really big hole in the earthen wall, which is intended to hold back water for this garden. And it caused a lot of erosion, which completely short-circuited the effectiveness of this garden. Instead of holding water to treat it, this garden was now just letting water through it completely and not really treating it and soaking it into the ground, which is really where we get the benefit of a rain garden. So we identified that as a really key part of the revitalization. We wanted to make sure that that worked when we walked away from the garden. On the right, you see the very beginning of it where water will flow into this garden at the very top from underneath the road. And you see all the rocks in there really just intended to slow the water down and spread it out. It's a really common feature of most rain gardens. This picture is really just conveying excessive debris inside of it. So these are the tasks that we identified after doing an assessment of the entire garden. So we went out this past summer and we realized we needed to do two phases. Basically, we needed to have one phase where we bring the garden back up to a good state where it's structurally sound and it's protected with ground cover. And then once we can ensure that that garden is going to perform correctly and not just have another structural failure, we would come back again in the fall and replant the entire garden. So we kind of determined, based on the condition of this one, we really wanted to make sure it was working before we invested with new plants in there that would then potentially either dry out or get eroded away in a big rainstorm. So we did these tasks list here. Next slide. And we worked with some volunteers to kind of scrape all of that Bermuda grass out, hauled it all away. We disposed of it at the landfill so it turns into compost later and it doesn't just respread. Bermuda grass is notorious for respreading. And so we got it to the point where it was basically scalped and we repaired the berm. Next slide. And then we mulched over everything. So now the garden's effectively turned from a sea of Bermuda grass to a sea of mulch. And we left it in this state so we could then monitor the garden. That's a really key part of this. We wanted to make sure it worked. Next slide. So we waited for a couple of rain events, and it happens periodically. After a few rain events, we did identify that there was still some erosion happening. You can see the red circle in the left picture. That's that same exact spot in the berm where the garden was eroding before, and it wasn't as drastic, but it's beginning to happen again. And so we realized that still needs to be addressed before we can really continue and finish this revitalization. So after doing some more measurements and kind of creating a second phase 2 plan, we determined exactly what we need to do to fix the erosion and prevent that from happening again. And we developed a planting plan to then begin sourcing plants, which you see there, to put into the garden. So next slide. So now we'll have a couple photos of just our work. Basically, we repaired that berm. You can see in the right photo, all the new clay that we added there, and we tamped it really tight. This whole time we were measuring elevations, which you can also see one of my crew members is holding a rod that helps you measure the elevation to ensure that we're building to the correct height. Next slide. And then you can see after they finished building the berm up to the correct elevation, they started planting in the garden, populating it with a whole new set of new plants. Something that we also provided as part of this is ways to ID these plants. Like I mentioned, it's really difficult, and that's one of the biggest barriers to maintenance is being sure that when you pluck that plant out of the ground, you're sure that it's a plant that doesn't belong and not something you paid for or that you wanted in the garden. So in this case, we're leaving materials behind so people can easily identify the plants, and as they continue to do maintenance, they'll become more familiar with them too, event to event. So we also identified, or we circled here in the right picture, that section of the berm has been repaired, remulched, and is back into a working state. So at this point, we basically are doing what we did in the first phase, is we want to wait and see how it performs after a rain event. So next slide. So we recently had a big rain event, I think the remnants of Hurricane Zeta a couple weeks ago. And so I happened to go out there and I met with Nancy McAllister, who's also on the webinar, and we just kind of checked out the garden to see how it was performing. And here you can see on the left photo, all 3 pools, 1, 2, and 3 off in the distance, are all full of water, and they're all flowing as intended from one to the next, exactly how the garden was supposed to work. Next slide. Let's see, I think there's a couple other photos of the problem area in question that we repaired. And you can see the water is actually ponding against it and nothing's actually flowing over. Looks like perhaps a little bit of mulch might have moved a little bit, but that's something that's easy enough to repair and something that we expect to happen. Mulch tends to move in a big rainstorm, but more importantly, water isn't flowing through there and the berm is holding up. So that was one of the key features that we are glad to see is finally repaired. So next slide. So the next steps is, like I said, continued maintenance. That is the most important part of this. And I think that's going to be talked about a little bit later. And there's a great green team that helped us out with that first phase. And due to rescheduling and some rain events, they weren't able to make it to the second phase, but we were greatly appreciative of their help. And we're really confident that they'll be able to take it from here with some support from us, because we're always available to help and continue maintaining this rain garden until those plants grow to maturity. Yeah. I think you're muted, Kolya.
Thanks, Ted. That was a lot of information to cram into 15 minutes or less. So I really appreciate it. And it's a great example of what needs to happen in terms of maintenance, and then what doesn't happen and as a result of lack thereof. So we'll be hearing more about that in a few minutes. And save your questions, folks, for the end, and you can type them into the chat as well. But next, without any further ado, and there's Ted's information, by the way, if you want to contact Ted at Howard EcoWorks, and he'll be staying on for your questions.
Yeah, please do.
So I'd like to introduce John Mara, who is the Eco-Literacy and Restoration Specialist with Blue Water Baltimore, and he is going to share with us maintenance of green roofs, rain barrels, and cisterns. Now, I'm aware many of our congregations do not have green roofs, but I know of 1 or 2. And many of them are considering rain barrels, so it's good to know how to do that, as well as maintaining cisterns. And we'll have some congregation example of one of these in a few moments. So take it away, John.
All right. So hi, everyone. Yes, my name is John Mara, Eco-Literacy and Restoration Specialist at Blue Water Baltimore. What that means is basically that if I'm not out if I'm not teaching people how to maintain things or how to plant trees, I'm doing it myself. This image here, you can see this is Blue Water Baltimore's old office. This is a little bit before and into my first years at Blue Water. We were at this office, so I wasn't there for its installation, and I wasn't there to help water things in. As you can see in the first image, I believe she was on our board and she's watering in a replacement plant. And then you can see the other images, what it looked like a few years later through regular weeding and maintenance. So yeah, let's get started. Next slide. I'm going to admit I did not make nearly as robust of a presentation as Ted did. Not as much of the like nitty gritty information in this. But just to say, yeah. So the green roof, the installation is one of the most intense part of the green roof, but that it does require maintenance as it goes on, especially because it's usually out of sight. You know, a lot of people, we don't think about dealing with leaks in our roof until the leak is there. We had the benefit of our green roof was on a lower roof outside of a window near our office kitchen, so we could regularly look out and be like, this has to get weeded. So I needed to go up there and check for weeds, but let's get to the benefits though. First thing first, yeah, they reduce stormwater runoff. We know that all the plants on top are going to absorb any incidental rainwater that's going to come out of the sky. You're going to it's another good source of habitat and food source for native species, mostly bugs, mostly pollinators and things like that. But the coolest thing is they reduce your building's energy consumption. When you have a green roof, it's another layer of insulation on top of your roof, and you know the plants are going to soak up as much sun as possible. In the winter, the layers of the extra layer on top of the roof is going to add its own level of insulation, and the heat that would otherwise escape up out of your roof is going to be trapped and be keeping the roots warm and healthy all winter, which is benefit. And you can see here there's 2 local examples at one at the National Aquarium and one at I can't remember that acronym right now, but it's a engineering and building at Morgan State, and they have a really extensive green roof. All right, next slide. Green walls, they are similar to a green roof except vertical. They require a different kind of plant system, a different kind of plant medium. A lot of times it's a lot of like plugs fit into these little tiny bags of soil, sort of like if you imagine like pointillism art, one little dot of each. You can have, the cool thing about green walls though is you can have them interior or exterior, and they offer a lot of the similar benefits to green roofs. You've got your insulation. You've also got sound reduction, which is really cool. That's they'll absorb any of the noise from outside, reducing the noise level there. They'll also absorb water that would otherwise start leaking into your home. And they improve, especially for interior, they improve the air quality there because you're going to, just like houseplants, you're exchanging oxygen and carbon dioxide with them all day. Yeah. Maintenance needs for green roofs. Yeah, regular maintenance, as it said. Again, not getting into the nitty gritty, but the medium that you're going to be planting in on a green roof is also just different. A structure needs to be built on top of the roof that needs to have different layers of soil that can be easily replaced. Usually there's a higher like sand, or not sand, but like rocky content in there to help like space out the soil, and you're going to plant things that are going to be able to grow like sedums or certain kinds of grasses. Let's see here. You don't want to put, unless it's really specifically built for this, you usually don't want to put mulch on a green roof though, because again, this is on top of your roof. It's already added weight, and with the structure that you had built on the roof, with the added medium, and then with the plants on it, and then you walking around on top of it. You want any moisture that's going to get in there, you want that to be sucked up by the plants as fast as possible. So mulch, while it's good in the rain garden or in a bioretention area for keeping down weeds, helping retain moisture and stuff like that, you don't want that for a green roof, because that's going to be moisture that could sit there and eventually make its way into your home. There's also the flip side of that. You need to then water it in periods of drought. You need to figure out a way to get up there and be able to water your plants, specifically if you see any like problem areas where there's some that are dying, and those need to get replaced if they do die. Same goes for a green wall. The plants need to be they don't need to be weeded. It's harder for weeds to get inside, but you do need to replace the dead ones. You also need to make sure you have a good irrigation system and a good lighting system to sort of keep the cycles that they would be going through outside and remade inside. All right, next slide. Okay, so moving on to rain barrels. This one's a little bit more tangible, a little bit more lower to the ground. So as you can see, rain barrels come in all shapes and sizes, and a lot of times they are rebuilt from a barrel that lived a previous life. There are a lot of kinds you can get that are specifically made. You could, like, if you want something that's tall and thin to put up against your house. If you want, you can see here, there's the second from the left is two barrels stacked on top of each other. They've had their lids cut off and they're flipped around, sealed together. And then two down from that is the blue one and a white one. Those are just, those are your pretty standard, gosh, I can't even remember how many gallons are in there. But it's just, it's a drum. We get ours donated to us from the local places like Pepsi and Coca-Cola. They, because their syrup comes in those things. We get them, we clean them out. Or Dietz and Watson has donated barrels to us. A lot of if you call around to usually food production places, they usually have these laying around. Again, different shapes and sizes. One time we got from I was just scraping the bottom of the rain barrel, so to speak. I was looking for anybody that I could. I found two pickle barrels that were like the big old kind that had a top you could screw on and off. So we used those for some. But yeah, so rain barrels are great because you're already reducing something that would otherwise become waste and not necessarily get used again. Because a lot of those things, if they had foodstuffs in them, they don't necessarily get reused. And they can be used for all sorts of things that you wouldn't necessarily think. So watering outdoor plants, filling watering cans to water your indoor plants, if you have some of those. You can also use them, as it says, washing cars, bikes, your gardening tools. But most importantly, as the second point then, the best part about these things is that they reduce the strain on our stormwater pipe infrastructure. Baltimore's pipe system was built over 100 years ago, and it hasn't really been replaced much in the time since then. So you have a city that's been growing, like so many cities have, built on an infrastructure that was meant for far fewer people. So there's like the urban legend of when like the season finale of MASH, during the commercial break, everybody flushed their toilets at the same time, and there was this like panic at the New York City water supply or something like that. When there's more people all using their water at the same time, there's more water rushing down the drain. So same goes for stormwater. Like when there's a huge rain event, all these houses have rooftops, all with driveways. There's sidewalks in front of those houses. There's roads in front of those houses. Anything new that's getting built out from the city is all being tied into that same infrastructure. So all the stormwater runoff that our homes and churches and roads and everything generates, you're reducing it by that many more gallons if you have a rain barrel installed. So if you don't even use it for watering your plants or cleaning things, you can just fill it up, and then on a day when it's not raining, you can just open it up and let it drain out. It's just again to take that burden off of our aging infrastructure. Next slide. Again, lots of options of ways, not only the types of rain barrels you can have, but ways you can install them, ways you can get that rainwater. So starting on the left here, you see this is another one of our upcycled drums with this. There's a spigot there on the bottom, and on the side there, the way this one works is you get the tube you drill a hole in the gutter, you drill a hole in the rain barrel, and using those rubber gaskets, you attach the two of them together, making sure that the tube is level. So what happens is, if you take a look at on the bottom there, there's a curved version of this. You can see the claw kind of is around the edge of the round downspout, and then there's a cup. So what happens is it's catching some of the water that's going. The other one has the square version, obviously. So the water's going down the side. It's going redirected through the hose into the rain barrel. Then when the rain barrel fills up and the water can't go in anymore, it's going to backflow over the cup through that hole and then go down into your storm drain. So that's just one. That's just one way of doing this, the direct inflow. You can also, go back. Sorry. You can see to the right of that rain barrel, there's also, you can put in a splitter on your downspout, and through the spring and summer or fall, you can click it over to the side that's going to drain into your rain barrel. Maybe through one of this, like the one just to the right of that, there's a screen in the top of the rain barrel. It's been cut out. Just have it flow down through. The screen's going to catch any debris, keep any mosquitoes from getting in there, any weeds. And then when it's wintertime, you switch it right back over. So and then in the bottom right corner, there's yet another one where you can redirect it, and it's again same sort of principle. When the barrel reaches equilibrium with the tube, it backflows in. And this is just this is the most like general version, like sampling I could get, because there's within each one of these, there's like another million subversions and like DIY versions, and everybody's got their own down home way of making it. It's great. Now you can go to the next slide. So cisterns and rain silos, same principle, just way bigger. And again, you have a lot of different options. In the bottom there, this is an older photo. This is probably the first cistern I installed. This is another upcycled cistern. That one I think had mulch dye in it, which originally we have several of these at our office, which we throw onto the back of our pickup trucks, strap them down, hook them up to pumps, and we fill them with hydrants, and we use those hydrants to water our street trees. So if you're somebody with a lot of property, if you've got a lot of trees in your backyard, one of these might be an option. You can see there's like some you can chain together. I mentioned earlier, you can have big flat ones that press up against your wall a little bit more out of the way. You can put them on the back of your house. Also important to think about, as I'm discussing these different sizes, shapes, types of rain barrels and cisterns, a lot of the type you're going to get is going to be dictated by where the downspouts are on your building, and how much rooftop is draining to one downspout. So there's a way you should before installing a barrel, it's good to take a lap around the property, and so you can go into Google Maps even and do a top-down assessment. Blue Water Baltimore, if you want, I believe we still have this program open. You can email. Oh, Jesse's still on maternity leave, so I don't know if she'd be doing it, but somebody will be. But yeah, you can get that assessment done through us, if I'm not mistaken. Next slide. Maintenance needs for rain barrels. Got to empty them regularly, or else it kind of defeats the purpose. You're just, you're generating more runoff. That also, if it's overflowing, if it's not the type that can backflow into the gutter or the downspout rather, an overflowing rain barrel could start getting into your the foundation around your building. Also, yeah, emptying it regularly reduces algae growth and mosquito breeding. Algae is, it's no good for plants. It's no good for gardens. And mosquito breeding, obviously, nobody wants that. Mosquitoes are really industrious. If they find one way to get into your rain barrel and lay eggs, they will. A couple of tricks for that. You can go to Home Depot or Lowe's or wherever and buy, they sell these dunks you can drop into a mosquito barrel or just on the internet. They look like little donuts. They're time release. They're safe for plants and animals, and they're not toxic for animals and kids. They're specifically targeted to kill mosquito larvae. And then there's another trick, which is a little bit more. Not everybody's into this one, but you can take some olive oil or something like that and pour it into your barrel, and that'll float to the top and create a layer that the mosquito won't be able to lay its eggs on because it won't be able to land on the water. But most importantly, though, is emptying out your rain barrel before the winter. So if even if the rain barrel is already empty, when you get the first frost of the season, it's time to winterize your barrel. Disconnecting it from your downspout, reconnecting your downspout to whatever system you had prior, or if you have a disconnected downspout that flows into your yard, great, do that. But yeah, you want to prevent the rain barrel from cracking or freezing. You want to prevent the hose attaching it from cracking or freezing. And to help with this, turn it upside down so it doesn't get any incidental moisture in there from condensation. And if you can, bring it indoors or put it under some kind of roof, like a shed or garage, or just throw a tarp over it. Because the other thing the weather is going to affect the rubber gaskets on your rain barrel as well, and those can like crack over time if they're exposed to the elements. Mm-hmm. Next slide. So this is an option I threw in here that's sort of a weird combination of both what Ted and I have been talking about today. So these are all along the wall of the Mount Lebanon Baptist Church, and you can see what they do. We've got two downspouts. That the one on the right is for the spring, summer, fall. That's what flows into the planter, and then on the winter time they click it over the left, and it goes right down in that long PVC pipe. And each planter is at a slightly different height. The medium planted inside is at a slightly different height as well. So what happens is it's like the rain will come down, it fills up the first chamber. Once it reaches that, you can see in the upper photo, there's like a little tube with some screen in there to prevent any mulch from flowing through. The water will rise up, flow through into the second one, and then that one will rise up and flow into the third one. Now that I thought about it, I should probably be using this when I describe how watersheds work, because that's basically it. Yeah, these are great. These are really fun and eye-catching options. You can do lots of different stuff with this. They work best with rain garden type plants that soak up a lot of moisture. If you do it off a smaller roof, and you don't have a large, like this is from a big roof, so a lot of moisture was coming in here.
Yeah, I also see a cistern there at the end corner. Well
spotted. Yeah, the Mount Lebanon Baptist Church was great. They went for they came to everything. They did all of our programs. They came to tree plantings. They came to cleanups. They did storm drain stenciling. They were our biggest fan for a year. It was great.
I think Ton was on tonight. Yeah.
Are on tonight too.
Hi.
And Beverly. Yes, Beverly and Ton was.
Beverly are on tonight.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's great.
Well, where are we now? We're running short on time, so I wonder if.
Oh, let's click through that. Other fun options I found, everything from public infrastructure, and boy, wouldn't that be nice, having a green roof to cool down and shade a bus stop. It's a rain saucer. That's a really simple one. If you can just toss it out in your backyard when it's about to rain, and then some of them they flip shut like that, like a fan, or they just collapse on themselves. And then this vertical planter here, that's made with a pallet, and that's basically what a green wall is. I don't know if I'd install it inside, but something you could put out in your backyard, hang on I've seen them hung on fences, and things like that.
Great.
Just a different story at the end. I think that's it. I think that's the whole
Yeah,
slide.
thank you so much, John. This was really
You're welcome.
great, and people know where to come for further advice if they need information. So I really appreciate it. We're going to move on now because actually there's a little bit of drum roll here. Here's our thank you, and yours too, for our rain barrel workshops. I know Blue Water Baltimore provides those, so that's something that congregations can offer as well. So that people can install the rain barrels on their home properties. So thanks again. I want to announce a new resource. If you're wanting to learn more about how to maintain your rain garden restoration project, your stormwater restoration project, that is, we're posting it on our resource page of our website. And if I can ask Talia to put that link in the chat so everyone can have it, that would be wonderful. The great thing about this is it not only has tips and techniques offered to us through Howard County EcoWorks, as Ted was sharing earlier, about the actual process of maintaining, but also spiritual reflections in keeping with the monastic tradition of ora et labora, which is to pray and work together. And just a quick sneak preview of some of the pages. You have these different sections: inspection, plant care, cleaning, mulch, and revitalization. And each one of them has a reflection that goes with that. So I commend that resource to you, and you can check it out either through the link in the chat or on our resources page. So I'm now going to segue to 3 congregation examples of maintenance, and they each have only about 3 minutes to talk. So if you can be as brief but as thorough as possible, we're looking forward to hearing from each of you. The first one is Silver Spring United Methodist Church, and you'll see there in the upper right corner a blessing of their cistern back in 2015. And I want to thank Rob Horn, a Green Team leader there, for sharing tonight about maintaining their cistern.
Okay, yes, I think that's my introduction there. Yes. So you can read those things. We were referred by the Interfaith, partners for the Chesapeake to Anacostia Riverkeeper, and they put it in for us. Of course, the money came from our county. Of course, and the church, and of course, the Chesapeake Bay Trust, and Anacostia Riverkeepers are the partners. So next slide.
Yeah, I'm glad to see you have signage. That's also a very important thing to let other folks know. Why is this cistern there? why is this restoration project happening? Go ahead.
Yes. Yeah, so the for us, we have this huge amount of water, right? If you let it flow by gravity, it flows so slowly, you'd be sitting there all day trying to water something. So we, our grant still had money left over. So the lady came around and said, "What do you need?" And I said, "Well, I need a pump." So I had a pump of my own. This is just like the same pump I have in my own house. But you like to say, these 2 things were part of the grant. Plus, actually, we got some trees too. But
great, wonderful.
Okay, so like especially with a pump and the cistern, everything has to be removed. So we removed the pipe, and took the cord off, and so we take it inside now for the winter, and it's already inside. So like I say, it'll be destroyed by water if it freezes. So yes. Yeah. Next one, yes. And then this device is part of the first flow. Because sometimes you don't want the dirty water that comes the first few minutes of the rain, and so this first flow collects a certain amount of water and then it filters it out, but it gets dirt and leaf debris down in and then we have to clean out this filter, put it back in maybe a couple times a year, right? That's what you do, Next one. And then finally, like you said, you have to clear this debris out. And let's say if you didn't clear the debris out, you keep it cleared out. Trees cause a lot of problems with your cistern. So this would sometimes be completely stuffed, and then the water can flow down the side of your building and get into the building's basement, which you don't want that. So you should clean this out 2 or 3 times a year, but like especially do it at the end of the season when you're already there to close it up. Yes. Next one.
Oops, sorry.
Oh yes, and of course he mentioned about the two-way switch. So it's switched there to the winter situation, and then so besides these, we have like a bunch of other stuff that we can use the water for watering, and so you try to use up the water if you can. And actually, some people maybe even like have the water flow out on a timer or something. So, but that's something we're thinking about getting, is like so that we do use up all the water, and then that way you know if you don't use it, it just all flows over and flows out into the green. In our case, it flows into the rain garden, but
Yeah.
but yes, so you keep those things clean and everything, keep it prepared for the winter, and you should have a lifetime of good clean water. So, yes.
Great, yeah, and I have to say, Silver Spring United Methodist Church has a rain garden. You also have a pollinator garden there.
No, we have two. Yeah, we have 2 rain garden
Two rain
complexes, and then we have. Yeah, and we get a refund from our taxes too on the water quality protection.
Mhm. Yeah.
And then we're participating in a new program where we get more plants. So again, like I say, I think we get like about 20% of our property is protected from, is improved for rain and wildlife and so forth.
That's great. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rob, because that's a great example of taking care of the cistern and make sure it's functioning properly. And there you have it, 865 gallon capacity. That means that stormwater is being slowed down and spread out, and it's sinking into God's good earth as it should, instead of running off and creating water pollution in our local streams. In this case, it would be Sligo Creek. So thank you so much, Rob. I'm going to segue on now to our next congregation example, and welcome Marty Simpson, the Green Team leader at St. John the Evangelist Catholic Church. And she's going to share with us the revitalization that took place at Westlake Interfaith Center.
Hi, I just put down our 4 biggest challenges, which were pretty overwhelming when we started. Our Green Team began during this COVID lockdown, and it was part of the Social Justice Committee. And we thought, well, maybe we can start on the Green Team and make some progress here. So we thought, well, we've got a rain garden. I had no clue there was a rain garden. I'm pretty new in the area, but some people said, yeah, it's at the end of the parking lot. And many people in the congregation, including Father Bowen, did not know where it was, because it's at the far end of the parking lot. And if you don't walk around there, you might not even know what it was. There is a small sign. So we thought, well, okay, we need to find out what to do. We did not really have any particular expertise, but we thought we could do this, perhaps with some parishioner who might have gardening and maintenance background. We weren't sure about funding, but we were prepared to do the big crunch down on writing a grant. And then we thought, well, we would provide our own labor, and we would also try to tap into the congregation and the workers as far as just creating interest and awareness of the need for care for creation. Can we do the next slide? This is our rain garden, and we thought, well, it looks like it's in pretty good shape. We can see some bare spots, and we see a little bit of landscaping fabric, but it didn't look too bad, and we thought, we can do this. Little did we know. Next slide. During one of these huge downpours in July, I went and I had an umbrella, but I was totally soaked. This is actually a video, and from the top of the hill, gallons and gallons and gallons of water poured down the hill from the Columbia Swim Center and off of a hardscape area off to the side. And this rain garden really does function, but you can see the barrier cloth is coming out and the stones have been moved, but it really performs as it was planned 12 years ago. Next slide.
Oops, there it
Click
goes.
again. So we decided to try to get some funding and some expertise. So I contacted Bonnie Sorak. Because we had taken the Faithful Green Leaders training, I thought, well, maybe she has some good ideas before we start searching on our own. And she just said, contact Howard EcoWorks. And what do you know? They were the ones who designed the garden 12 years ago. And when they came out, they said, okay, we'll take care of the expertise. We will determine what needs to be done. We will source your supplies and materials. So there's our funding. I did not need to write a grant. That was great. And they would also supervise and train people as they were doing the refresh. So one big step that I thought was brilliant, thank you to our team leader, she said, well, let's tie it into September, which is Care for Creation, or Season of Creation Month. And so all month we had prayers and we had a little announcements, and we explained what the rain garden was for and the religious commitment to care for creation. Next. So this is Ted, and he was doing something really important, in that he's educating the scout troop. We have 2 scout troops at our church, and we had them in 2 shifts so we could distance and not have too many people working in the garden. And he was explaining at the top of the hill where the rain goes and why we need to capture all this polluted runoff. And that's part of the long-term commitment to maintenance, is basically teaching them why we're doing it. Next slide. So here's Ted again, and he's teaching them how to do some trimming. And then he and the horticulturalist that he also brought had the plants laid out, and they talked a little bit about the spacing. So the kids decided what they wanted to do, and they chose what they liked, which I thought was another important component, and that is make it fun and create teamwork so that people feel competent, empowered, and they want to continue doing this. Next slide. This was the replacement of all the barrier cloth. This took so long, we had no clue. And if we had done this ourselves, I'm sure we would not have done this. We did not realize how much sediment was there on all the stones. We just thought maybe the stones had been rearranged, but there is so much water coming off the hill, it brings a lot of polluted sediment with it. So there's Ted in his Dayglow vest, and the kids had to take one rock out after each one rock after another, and chip off all the dirt off the rocks, put in new barrier cloth, and then put it down. And the kids were really having a good time with this. So it did create a lot of good feeling. And as I am really adamant about saying, you need to create this feeling of teamwork so that there is a strong commitment. Next.
Great.
And these are the 2 scout groups. Part of our agreement with Howard EcoWorks is basically that we will be long-term stewards. And that, as you say, is the biggest challenge. We do have 2 groups. One is the Hispanic group, which is on the left, had a lot of parents who were there. Now, Ted did an absolutely amazing job speaking in Spanish, so the parents know exactly what their kids were doing and why. So I do believe that the parents have also some stake in this, because they know why we're caring for this garden. And this was on the right is the second group, which did most of the replacement of the rocks. Now, we still have to suss out how they're exactly going to be sharing this partnership along with the green team for the care. But we do have a month-by-month plan given to us by Howard EcoWorks. We did not have the huge renovation that the previous congregation did. Ours was still working, was still functioning. We hardly have any weeds. We did not need to mulch. It was basically just cleaning off the rocks, replacing the cloth, adding more plants.
Mhm.
And it's just a highly functioning garden that just needed like a refresh. But the barrier cloth was a little bit at the end of its life, and we would not have done it, but the Howard EcoWorks provided the material and the expertise. So that was key. And that was because we took the Faithful Green Leaders training. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Marty. I really appreciate you sharing the story, and it's really inspiring to see all the ways that everyone pitched in to make it happen. And now I'm going to move on to our next example, which we actually heard some about. And this is St. John's Episcopal Church. And here is Green Team Leader Nancy McAllister to share more about that.
Thank you so much, Kolya. I appreciate it. Most of my slides this evening are pictures, because a picture is worth 1,000 words. I know we're running short on time. I'm from New Jersey and can talk fast, so fasten your seatbelts. But just in short, Ted already touched a bit on our rain gardens. We have 5 rain gardens that were installed on our church property by the READY program, which is now Howard EcoWorks, back in 2014. Some of those rainbow pictures of the site plans that Ted shared earlier, again, were from our gardens. Mm-hmm. And we had a tradition of caring for the environment already as a part of our congregation, as well as our parish day school at St. John's. We had seminars and basecaping programs, and the students were doing native gardens. And so we already had some efforts going on prior to the installation of these rain gardens. But there's nothing like the bottom line to get a new initiative going, right? And our church vestry, which is our board of directors, got wind of the fact that the stormwater fees were coming and to Howard County. We're in Ellicott City in Howard County. And we were trying to weigh our options as a congregation as to how we could do the right thing and be good stewards of our budget. So good stewards of the environment, as well as good stewards of our budget. We are thankful, forever, ever thankful and grateful. We feel so fortunate to have worked with and are currently working with Howard EcoWorks and Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake. It's been amazing for us. Some of the challenges, I wanted to address some of the challenges along the way. The biggest challenge for us, I mean, thinking back 6 years ago now, it's really been passing on the instructions for maintenance of these gardens. You see, they're not small. This is just one of our 5, and that lines a good portion of the entire drive as you head onto our church property. So I and several others had learned how to care for these and the ins and outs of emptying, say, a sediment trap and things like that. And we have campus cleanup days a few times a year where the whole campus is tidied up. But I hadn't always been in attendance at those days, and I wasn't always able to pass on that information, or I had passed it on to individuals who I thought would continue being there, and just it happens over time. So our solution for spreading the word, actually, we realized it came to our attention that we needed to spread the good news about these rain gardens. Last fall, I got wind of the fact that several church members were concerned about the state of the rain gardens and whether they were functioning and whether they still contained a lot of the native plants that were originally installed. So I always say, never underestimate the power of standing in front of people with a clipboard and enthusiastically asking for help. And that's what I did at several of our services. Prior to the pandemic, I was asking folks for their volunteer time and for help to create and recreate and rejuvenate our green team to care for these gardens. Because of this clipboard, 30 people signed up, which I was thrilled. So we have 30 on our email distribution list. It's been so meaningful, especially in the context of the pandemic, for our congregation to be able to gather safely and accomplish something meaningful on our campus for the environment. and have a spiritually enriching experience. I have thanked our volunteers profusely. We have some regulars who, actually we have 4 of us who will be meeting out there tomorrow morning. And I was thankful Ted met me out there last week, and we tromped around and mucked around in the rain and looked at the gardens. But I have thanked those volunteers so much, and I have had so many of them thank me. And they say that this is a prayerful time for them to be able to spend this time to meditate and to pray and to be with God's creation on campus. They are just thankful and grateful to have that opportunity to have some peace and quiet and gather safely on our campus at this time. So again, we are forever grateful to Howard EcoWorks and Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake for helping us spur on our green team and continue doing God's work and helping the environment and these rain gardens that are going to be beautiful. I can't wait for spring. So thank you all so much. It's great to be with you this evening. Thank you, Kolya.
Oh, thank
and
you.
Ted and everyone.
Thank you, Nancy. Amen and amen. That was wonderful. And it's so great to see all the folks out there who were volunteering, and you're a great example of recruiting people to help. So we're now going to move on now. I know this is an example of what we had seen earlier of what Ted was talking about that got fixed up and renovated. But now it's time for questions and answers. And I apologize that we're running up against time, but we can go over the hour if you can a little bit. So do we have some questions in the chat?
Yeah, Kolya. So we can jump in. There's 3 questions that I have that hopefully we can get to. The first one I think is to Ted. Did you have an engineer help with the erosion issue? I think you were talking about erosion in one of the examples.
Yeah, and to answer that, no, we didn't have an engineer help with that. We actually don't have an engineer on staff. And when the garden was designed, it was designed kind of, as you saw, on just a spreadsheet kind of paper. Back when we were still kind of learning about rain gardens, we knew the basics and how to install them, but we didn't have an engineer. And we don't need them specifically for these practices in the sense that they're really small. Typically, when you start disturbing over 5,000 square feet of square footage, of an area for a project, then you start to need to get into an engineered design. Permitting becomes an issue at that point. So most of our practices are between 100 and maximum maybe 1,000 square feet in terms of just area coverage. So we didn't need an engineer in that case. We just needed the original designs that we knew the elevations needed to be built to. And so we just, using the optical level and measuring just all around that area, we kind of just figured it out ourselves, because it's not too complicated when you think that water always just wants to go to the lowest point. It wants to always flow to the lowest point in an area. And so that's an easy tidbit to kind of remember by.
Mm-hmm. And so then the next question is, how often does the rock and the fabric need refreshing in a rain garden?
Yeah, so typically we recommend cleaning the sediment out of the rocks at least once a year. Something that you can identify just by looking at the rocks. If they're starting to get buried in sediment or mulch or organic matter, it's probably a good idea to clean them at the next event. That fabric underneath, it kind of depends what kind of fabric you have. We used to use one thing called landscape fabric. It feels much more like cotton, kind of like clothes in that sense, like actual fabric. We've since switched to something called geotextile, which is a plastic kind of woven material. They both are black and they're both just in sheets. And basically we found the geotextile lasts longer. And so we switched to that. I tend to recommend, if the fabric underneath your rock features are, at least 2 to 3 years old, it would be a good idea to take all the rocks off and then just inspect it. See if there's any holes in it. See if it's got a really fine sheen of sediment on it that might be clogging the actual fabric and then affecting how much water can actually get through that fabric over time. So I tend to recommend 2 to 3 years. You need to start looking at it. And the fabric in this garden at Wild Lake Interfaith Center, that garden was put in 2012. So that was about 8 years old. And it was getting to the point where it was being torn in certain places and it was really heavily sedimented. And so since the sediment had never been cleaned either, that also created a kind of a more of a sheen. And so I think if that was to be maintained more, the fabric would probably last longer.
Okay, thanks. And then one last question about mulch. I think this is from Cathedral of the Incarnation. It looks like their landscape company tends to over mulch their rain garden. So can you speak to whether to mulch and when to mulch and how much?
Yeah, we actually try and get away from mulching as much as possible. The only way you can do that though is if you have something else to cover the ground. You do want to cover the soil. And the best way to do that is with plants. If you are in the process of establishing a really heavy plant coverage, you do need to mulch. We recommend to mulch in the spring. We tend to recommend, not over mulching. And so we say 2 to 3 inches maximum. The real purpose of mulch is just to cover the soil so it's not exposed to sunlight and direct droplets of rain, which cause erosion. And so that tends to be what I recommend, doing it in the spring in combination with the good weeding in the spring. Those two tasks go hand in hand to pull out the weeds and then mulch on the ground, and that'll help suppress the regrowth of weeds throughout the year. A good weeding and a good mulching in the spring will really save the amount of mulching and weeding you have to do throughout the rest of the year. So maybe just talking to your landscape company, it tends to be a really common issue that they throw a lot of mulch in rain gardens. Landscape companies tend to react differently to rain gardens, so it's always a good idea to just talk to them, let them know like this is a rain garden, this isn't just a aesthetic landscaping bed. It has a function, and by putting too much mulch in there, you're going to reduce its capacity to treat water, and you're also going to create more work for us in the long run.
Okay, one last question. So Deborah Ryan is asking, can you provide consultation to our church? And Deborah, you can unmute yourself and let us know what OC.
Ocean City?
Is it Ocean City?
They're in Ocean City.
Okay.
I was just looking up who the water keeper is in Ocean City. So
Yeah.
We don't work on the Eastern Shore, just given the distance from us. We actually have launched a new virtual consultation service. Given the coronavirus, we stopped going out to people's properties in person and meeting with them, and we've offered that as an alternative. Right now it's closed because we're in a period of heavy designing for next year's spring projects, but that will open up again. And so we do offer that at a small fee to homeowners, to HOAs, to congregations, to other nonprofits. So yes, we could do a virtual consultation. We would never meet in person, but we would send you a map with recommendations and suggested actions based on what our landscape designer sees.
Great. All right. So it's 8:04.
I have a comment about the
Oh.
hardwood mulch. It actually floats. In your picture, it's floating, right? And so
Yeah.
that's what clogs your stones. You have to use another material, or I mean, eventually don't mulch the bottom of the rain garden at all, because it's just going to float up and clog your drains. So,
Yeah, exactly. And ideally, that's where you get plants covering everything, and then you don't need to mulch.
Yeah, that's what we have. I mean, it's really dense plants everywhere right now. So we have. We don't mulch it the bottom of the rain garden at all.
That's the goal. Yeah, that's a great status.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Rob. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us on this webinar. Again, this is part of our Green Team training, Faithful Green Leaders training. And if you want more information, you go to this link on our website. You would click on our programs and you'll see Green Leaders training there. And also, as well as access to resources if you're wondering how to build your team. You go to this other link on our resources page. And we'll be sending out the recording of this, and you can also look on our resource page for the newly launched Sustaining Your Rain Garden with Spiritual Practices. So you can look for that there. Thank you for everyone for being on this webinar.
Thank you for having me. Us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Kolya. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Ted, everybody. Bonnie, good to see you all. I'm excited for the guide, the maintenance guide. I can't wait.